Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Simon Marks from Washington, D.C. Let's begin with the fast-moving top stories of the hour. Moscow says it is pulling back some of its forces near the Ukrainian border to their bases in what could be the first major step towards de-escalation after weeks of tensions with the West. The Russian parliament asks President Putin to recognize the breakaway Ukrainian provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent. Kyiv says the move would mean Moscow breaking the Minsk agreements.
So far, we have not seen any de-escalation on the ground, not seen any signs of reduced Russian military presence on the borders of Ukraine.
Even as Russia says that it is withdrawing some troops, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says he is yet to see any de-escalation on the ground, but he says NATO will continue monitoring the situation. China slams the G7 over its threat of sanctions on Russia over the Ukraine crisis. Beijing says the indiscriminate use of sanctions would lead to further division and confrontation. And Paris inaugurates its first noise radar as part of a plan to fine the owners of loud motorcycles and other vehicles in one of Europe's noisiest cities. Lots of rapidly moving parts in the Ukraine story today in what Russia is claiming is a de-escalation of the crisis on the country's border with Ukraine. Some Russian military units have pulled back from the border. It's not clear how many units have been withdrawn and just how far from the border they are moving. It is estimated around 130,000 Russian troops are stationed to the north, east and south of Ukraine. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is in Moscow for meetings with President Vladimir Putin. The leaders sat across that enormous table in the Kremlin and held diplomatic talks to defuse escalating tensions over Ukraine. This meeting, the latest diplomatic effort launched by Western leaders in the last few days alone.
Natürlich ist klar, dass wir jetzt in dieser Zeit über die schwierige Situation, was Frieden und Sicherheit in Europa betrifft, zu sprechen haben, wie Sie das ja auch schon mit meinem französischen Amtskollegen getan haben. Aber ich bin froh, dass das jetzt möglich ist und dass wir darüber sprechen können. Denn das Wichtigste ist ja, dass wir die Beziehungen zwischen den Staaten durch gute Gespräche miteinander lösen und das der Weg ist, wie das geschieht.
The future of cooperation between Russia and Germany over energy supplies is a priority issue for Moscow. It views Berlin as one of its main partners for Russian liquid natural gas. And Germany's economic ties with Russia are complicating the united Western front to confront Russia in the event of an invasion. The German Chancellor says that world leaders have to confront what he called a difficult situation concerning peace and security in Europe. Germany is the third European country after France and the UK to pay a diplomatic visit to both the Ukrainian and Russian leaders over the last several days. Reports have claimed that, like Emmanuel Macron before him, the German Chancellor declined to take a Kremlin-administered COVID test during his Moscow visit and opted for a swab from one of his own doctors, which may be why both the French and German leaders have been seated so far away from the Russian president during their respective talks. The US believes that a small, crucial window for diplomacy remains open for a de-escalation of tensions over Ukraine as Western leaders engage in that flurry of talks to defuse the crisis. But on the ground, while some Russian troops have returned to their bases after finishing drills near Ukraine's borders, Russia's defense ministry has released a video showing large-scale drills taking place across the country. Some units of the southern and western military districts can be seen returning to base. Video footage published by the Defence Ministry shows some tanks and other armoured vehicles being loaded onto railway flat cars. But Ukraine's foreign minister in Kyiv says the country's government will only believe in de-escalation after it sees Russia's pullout occur and take hold.
Russia constantly makes various statements. That's why we have the rule. We won't believe when we hear. We will believe when we see. When we see troops pulling out, we will believe in de-escalation.
These are the latest satellite images of Ukraine's borders. They show the recent movement of military equipment and aircraft around Ukraine. US-based Maxar Technologies said these images were taken over the last 48 hours. They show developments in annexed Crimea, Western Russia and Belarus. The images show new Sukhoi Su-34s being deployed in Russia around 75 miles from Ukraine. They also appear to show an increase in activity by troop housing and vehicle movements in Yelnya, near the border with Belarus. The United States is sending another 3,000 troops to Poland in the coming days as Russia continues with its military exercises in Belarus and the Black Sea. These US soldiers are additional to the 8,500 troops already on alert in the US to deploy to Europe. With the number of troops now growing in Europe, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will depart tomorrow to visit Belgium, Lithuania and Poland. He's also set to meet NATO allies in Brussels. The UN chief also expressed his anxiety over the heightened rhetoric and called for public statements to be aimed towards calming the crisis, not fanning it.
Still on track for climate catastrophe, even with the last...
The time is now to defuse tensions and de-escalate actions on the ground. There is no place for incendiary rhetoric. Public statements should aim to reduce tensions, not inflame them. I welcome the recent flurry of diplomatic contacts and engagements, including between heads of state, but more needs to be done, and I expect all to intensify their efforts.
Meanwhile, reports here in Washington indicate that some Western intelligence officials are warning the Russians had plans to launch an invasion starting tomorrow. But Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky appeared to dismiss that suggestion in an address to the nation, although he announced that Wednesday would now be marked as National Unity Day in Ukraine instead, a holiday. He urged his countrymen to fly the national flag in defiance.
February 16, 2022, the doomsday prediction for Ukraine. Western media says Russia could invade on this day. But Ukraine's president has something else planned for the day.
We have been told that February 16 will be the day of the attack, but we will make it the day of unity. On this day, we will hang national flags, put on yellow and blue ribbons and show our unity to the whole world. We have one big European aspiration. We want freedom and are ready to fight for it.
Volodymyr Zelensky is not predicting an attack, but responding skeptically to the foreign media reports. While Russia is threatening to attack Ukraine, Zelensky believes that the likelihood of an imminent invasion has been overstated by Western allies.
We are being threatened by a big war, and a date of military invasion was scheduled once again. It's not for the first time. A war is being conducted systematically against us on all fronts. On the military front, military contingent is increased around our borders. On the diplomatic front, they are trying to deprive us of the right to decide foreign policy on our own. On the energy front, they reduce gas, energy and coal supplies. On information front, they want to disseminate panic among us, among Ukrainian citizens, among investors through media.
Zelensky's office has released a decree calling for all villages and towns in Ukraine to fly the country's flags on Wednesday. He asked the entire nation to sing the national anthem at 10 a.m. local time. The decree also called for an increase in salaries of soldiers and border guards. Meanwhile, U.S. officials in the Pentagon were quick to react to President Zelensky's remarks.
So I won't get into a specific date. I don't think that would be smart. I would just tell you that it is entirely possible that he could move with little to no warning.
Russia has amassed over 100,000 troops near the border of Ukraine. Moscow says it could take unspecified military technical action unless its range of demands are met, including barring Kyiv from ever joining the NATO. But Russia has agreed to keep talking to the West, even though the talks are just being dragged into never-ending negotiations.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia will present its ideas on responses we received about our proposals sent to U.S. colleagues to Washington and to colleagues from NATO to Brussels.
Our coherent explanatory work and the commitment to the clarification of our rightness together with the readiness for listening to counter-arguments. Our possibilities aren't exhausted. Of course, they shouldn't continue endlessly, but at this stage, I would propose to continue and increase them.
Ukraine has already suffered economic damage from the standoff. Ukraine International Airlines are concerned of the insurers terminating some of their aircraft coverage. Washington has offered up to $1 billion to Ukraine in sovereign loan guarantees to calm the markets. The German chancellor has announced a credit of $170 million for Ukraine. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
In light of the tense situation in and around Ukraine, several countries have decided either to suspend or shift their embassies from the capital Kyiv. In a controversial move, the United States is relocating its diplomatic operations to the city of Lviv in western Ukraine.
The United States is relocating its Ukraine embassy operations from the capital Kyiv to the western city of Lviv, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Monday, citing a dramatic acceleration in the buildup of Russian forces. The move comes as U.S. officials warn that Moscow was continuing to amass more than 100,000 troops near Russia's border with Ukraine and in neighboring Belarus and could launch an attack at any time. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said the move is based on Russia's threatening military posture.
We are basing our assessment on what we are seeing on the ground with our own eyes, which is a continued and unprovoked Russian buildup on the border with Ukraine and no accompanying evidence of de-escalation.
Most embassy staff have already been ordered to depart Ukraine, and U.S. citizens have been advised to leave the country by commercial means. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby on Monday warned that if Russia were to attack Ukraine, there would be casualties on both sides.
Should they conduct another major military action, real lives will be at risk. Ukrainian lives, to be sure, but also Russian lives. This will not be bloodless.
Moscow denies Western accusations that it is planning an invasion. Russia suggested on Monday that it was ready to keep talking to the West to try to defuse the security crisis. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said diplomatic possibilities are far from exhausted.
Now, after months of on and off negotiations, Iran said on Monday that an agreement to revive the 2015 nuclear deal with world powers is near. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, added to hopes of a renewed agreement, saying that he believed a deal was in sight. But progress might not be as imminent as the various claims suggest. The Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi has insisted that sanctions must be truly lifted and the rights of the Iranian people respected for any new deal to be forged. And Iran's foreign minister further blamed a lack of will on the part of the West for being behind what he called an unnecessary prolongation of the talks. He also stressed that Iran will not back down from its red lines. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke to his Iranian counterpart and noted a tangible move forward in attempts to revive the deal. The talks involve Iran, Britain, China, France, Germany and Russia, and the United States, which is participating but only communicating with the Iranians indirectly. The 2015 deal offered Iran relief from crippling sanctions in exchange for Iran's agreement to curb its nuclear program. But it was thrown off course after the U.S. withdrew 3 years later, a decision made by then-President Donald Trump. The U.S. reimposed sanctions and prompted Tehran to go back on its commitments. The U.S. State Department has struck a cautious note, saying that time is almost running out to strike a deal.
Time is almost out. Time is very quickly ticking away. We've been very clear that at the current rate of Iran's nuclear advances, we have little time left, and that's precisely because at a certain point, very soon, those nuclear advances will obviate the advantages that the JCPOA, as it was finalized in 2015 and implemented in 2016, initially conveyed.
Negotiations in Vienna aim to return the U.S. to the nuclear agreement, lifting some of its sanctions on Iran and to ensure Tehran's full compliance with its commitments. The talks began in Vienna in April of last year amid growing Western fears about Iran's nuclear advances. They are now seen as being irreversible unless an agreement is struck soon. Moving on now, as part of a 2019 mobility law, Paris is introducing noise radars to identify and record loud motorcycles and vehicles. The noise radars will function very similarly to speed radars, with automated fines being issued. The system is currently being tested to see how accurately the radars can identify license plates, after which it will go through a final approval process. No fines will be issued for now, but Paris plans to start issuing them from early next year. Under the current laws, even though authorities have the power to sanction the owners of loud vehicles, an adept system to catch the driver in the act of noise pollution had been lacking, hence the installation of these specialised radar systems. The government is also deploying more noise radars in other French cities. Paris is one of Europe's noisiest cities. 5.5 million people there are exposed to traffic noise at 55 decibels and higher, followed by London and Vienna. The measures aim to reduce those levels, at least in France. South Korea's presidential candidates are now campaigning in an election expected to be the tightest race between the country's two main parties for 20 years, one that's dominated by scandals, allowing a third challenger to play the role of potential kingmaker. Opinion polls show that corruption, runaway housing prices and deepening inequality are central issues dogging Asia's fourth largest economy. According to polls, voters want a president who can tackle those issues. Curbing North Korea's weapons tests and resuming talks would also be a plus. January, of course, was a record month for North Korea's missile testing. But even that hasn't made foreign policy a key issue in South Korea's March the 9th poll. 14 candidates have signed up. Lee Jae-myung is the flag bearer for the ruling Democratic Party. He's facing off against Yoon Suk-yeol from the conservative main opposition People Power Party. They are neck and neck in opinion polls, but Yoon has maintained a slight lead over recent weeks. The Democratic Party's candidate is a former governor of Cheongji province. His advocacy of universal basic income and aggressive handling of the COVID-19 pandemic shot him to prominence. Yoon, running for the opposition PPP, is a political novice, but has gained popularity as a staunch prosecutor general. He steered high-profile investigations into corruption scandals that engulfed aides to former President Park Geun-hye and current President Moon Jae-in. And yet, controversies have overshadowed the real issues troubling South Korea. There's growing frustration over smear campaigns and controversy involving both main candidates' families. That's been a fillip for Ahn Chol-soo, renowned software mogul and doctor, who is a minor opposition contender, but his latest ratings hovered between 7 and 8% and previously had peaked at 15%. Polls indicated a convincing victory were he to unite his candidacy with Yoon, an idea that is now endorsed by Ahn himself after he offered to merge campaigns over the weekend. Some officials from Yoon's campaign are also calling for a merger. Dozens of Peruvian four-legged friends tied the knot in a marriage ceremony on Valentine's Day. You don't believe us? Watch the next report and I'll see you again tomorrow.
WION, India's global